Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're glad you're here. Today we're talking about the future. Um, there is no DeLorean, unfortunately, but we are going to be talking about migrating network monitoring into a future state. Now, we do have some folks piling into the workshop webinar, this webcast broadcast. You're the broadcaster, Phil, not me.
Hmm.
I'm Josh. I do product marketing here at Kintick and try to head up our team when it comes to solving customer problems and trying to answer that overarching question of how do we take this, meaning Kintick, and make it make sense and be valuable to customers. And with me, of course, as most of you will know, is Phil Gervaisi. Phil, introduce yousself. You probably
Sure.
don't need one.
Well, you flatter me way too much, Josh. I think there are certainly folks that do not have any idea who I am. But I will say that I wonder if it's more multicast than broadcast, because for folks to get today's webinar, they would have had to register and then intentionally sign in, and therefore it's not t- truly broadcast.
Yeah.
So rather than configure IGMP snooping and all these things, I'll introduce myself. My name is Phil Gervasi, and I have been a traditional network engineer. I use that term in air quotes for maybe 13, 14, 15 years, which in more recent years has become much more broad than the network and has included other systems as far as things that we're going to discuss today. And in recent days have been working in technical marketing, but staying very, very close to the technology, whether it be networking or in the context of some emerging technologies, several of which that we're involved with at Kentic.
So that's it, folks. That's the cast of characters. You're stuck with us. But the subject matter, of course, is upgrading, getting into the future, letting go of the past, all of these fine things when it comes to ditching something that might be legacy. But what brought us here? So let's start there. Um, a lot of networks evolved. The tools for them did not. That's the simple short of it. Is that the instruments needed to navigate this world of the way that networks look today is radically different than just 10 years ago, 5 years ago, three, two, maybe last year it was one for some of you out there. Things are radically different and they've been shifting over several years, but the tools and instruments that we use to make sense of all of that have not really evolved to mirror the innovations of the rest of the network. One of those things, Phil, I know we talk about sometimes is we have an old system, kind of an on-prem typical deployment. Updating the code base is a little bit difficult. When you get new kinds of telemetries, take like streaming telemetry, and now SNMP, we're going to get to that. Okay, is it dead or not? We'll answer. But when it comes to new forms of telemetry, we see a big increase when it comes to the need for streaming telemetry. And some of these ancient systems don't really, they weren't designed for that. You can't just quickly update the code base to ingest a new form of telemetry as those evolve, as those emerge. And who knows where that's going to head as our networks continue to become more ethereal, more co-owned, co-located, co-everything. And when it comes to managing the composition of all of that, because the composition fundamentally has changed. And so the tools meant to manage it need to as well. Not to just pick on SolarWinds, by the way, they're just one that everybody knows about. There are dozens of different tools out there. It's just one that, everybody knows. When it comes to, when you think legacy and you think NPM, you kind of go there like, in your mind. So not a direct call out or anything, just needed somebody to represent that legacy. But Phil, before we get into the question of SNMP being dead,
Mm-hmm.
anything you'd add here when it comes to, I mean, you worked with a lot of these tools.
Sure did.
What
Yeah.
the practical aspects of what we're talking about here. It's one of those, when you look at market categories in the direction of evolution and innovation, but it's another thing to live with some things that might be rusted.
Yeah, yeah, and SolarWinds has done a great job thus far. And so we use them as an example of what does it mean to not move into the future of networking, or rather of network monitoring. But I've used a variety of other tools, and they tend to be point solutions. They tend to be focused on one particular telemetry type or one part of the network. which begs the question, what is the network today in 2024? And the answer is much more broad than simply the switches in the IDF down the hall, and maybe some core switching in a data center on the other side of the campus. In those days, you could get away with one or two types of telemetry. You can get away with a simplistic system. You're not correlating a lot of disparate data sets and looking at all these different things. And so it worked. So it's not that we are saying that those things are bad. They're just not suitable for where we are today. And so if you think about what is the network in 2024, I like to use the image of the tapestry. It's this giant patchwork of multiple components, all involved with forwarding packets, forwarding network information, and that includes network adjacent things as well. So of course, we're still going to care about our traditional network devices like switches and routers and firewalls. And a lot of those are going to be virtualized now, whether that's on premises or in the cloud. So now we have to start consider cloud networking. And Josh, one of the things I've noticed over the past few years is a lot of cloud engineers, like used to be network engineers, right? They've sort of transitioned from one to the other. And so yeah, there are some networking constructs in the cloud that are synonymous and analogous, and there's also some other things that we've had to learn, and there are challenges there. Of course, we also have network overlays. I remember being a network architect not long ago before getting into tech marketing, and almost overnight stopped talking about routers with my customers. It was only SD-WAN moving forward. If we're going to replace your WAN, it's with whatever SD-WAN vendor. And that was an entire project and an entire conversation, of course. But my point is that we have network overlays that we're trying to gather telemetry from. That's new. A lot of modern applications are built on a container environment. And they're talking to each other. So there's networking, container networking we have to take into account. And of course, there's always our beloved DNS, which is critical with things like load balancing and getting us to where we want to go without memorizing every IP address. And there's a ton of other components as well. Just kind of giving you a quick survey here. So it's the idea of what is the network in 2024 is very different than it used to be. And so we have these new problems, these new challenges to deal with. How do I get visibility into all these environments? I mean, I mentioned public cloud. I don't own AWS. And so how do I get the information I want? Well, you take what AWS can give you, and hopefully it's sufficient. And if it's not, how do I piece this together? From my SaaS providers, how do I get information from a network overlay if it's a managed SD-WAN or something along those lines? So we're going to have to start looking at new tools. We're going to mention some new protocols today, but it's not just about protocols, Josh. You mentioned streaming. That's important. We're going to talk about SNMP. We're going to talk about streaming telemetry. We're going to talk about eBPF. But it's also, what are we doing with this data? And I really believe that today's NMSs need to be more of a data analysis tool in the context of networking, sure, and all these things I mentioned, because I have to look at this entire picture as a whole. Something I don't have in the notes, so I hope you don't mind me ad-libbing here, is the idea of, Kentic is, we are the network observability company. That's our slogan. That's what we put in our marketing. And the idea of network observability or observability, to use a little bit more broad term, comes from control theory originally. And this idea of looking at the outputs of a system without, changing the system to understand that system's health. Well, the system here we're talking about is whatever we're using, the mechanism, the substrate for application delivery, because that's what we really care about. And that is the network, right? Like, we don't care about the plumbing in our house per se. We care about the water coming out of the tap. And in that sense, if you extrapolate that out, we kind of do care about the plumbing. So we care about application delivery. So therefore, we care about this system, the network, and all that means. And observability is looking at it as a whole, which today is, again, not just an IDF and some switches and a core switch and maybe a router and a firewall. It's a lot more than that. So, using simply SNMP, or I say simple because there's some complexity there, but only SNMP or only flow does not cut it. That's where we're heading today with a modern NMS, is not saying that those NMSs of the past are bad, but they're not sufficient. So I do want to dig into SNMP and streaming in particular, because that seems to be kind of one of the main concerns that folks have, is that, hey, I'm having trouble getting the information that I want from my network using SNMP only. So back in, I don't remember what year. There was a Nanog 73, I believe, where some folks from Google were doing a presentation, which became very, very important for a lot of folks, and in considering SNMP and migrating away, where they said SNMP is dead, and I understand where they're coming from. SNMP has some weaknesses, some drawbacks that streaming telemetry solves. But I think it's important to remember that, I don't know, something like 99% on the screen, you see 99.9% of organizations still use SNMP for network
They do.
monitoring.
They do.
Maybe what's that, Josh?
They do. I'm just
Yeah,
yes, chiming in from the cheap seats. Yes, they do.
yeah, yeah. That's a lot. That's a lot of organizations. Now, that means that it's a common technology. It is a ubiquitous technology that's supported on many, many devices. It's well documented, well understood. And so to say that it's just dead and we're all going to cut over in, tomorrow or this next change window next weekend is not, I don't think, accurate. Now, is it dying? Should we be thinking about migrating away to something more modern that solves some of the problems? Yeah, yes, of course. But it's certainly not dead, which is why I believe, and I think you agree, Josh, the modern NMS is going to facilitate the adoption of newer telemetry protocols, but with also supporting SNMP and flow and everything else that we can get. So keep in mind that no one's going to do a rip and replace of their entire network in one day, in one cutover. So you're going to have legacy components of your network, or you're going to have some sort of proprietary stuff in your network that, though might be brand new and therefore not technically legacy, only supports SNMP. And so we need to hold on to that. And so we're really going to look at these in the same platform. That's something I want to discuss more in depth with you in a little bit. So if you think about SNMP first introduced in 1987, it's almost 40 years old, which to me means it's been wildly successful. That's not saying, therefore, that SNMP is bad. But I do want to highlight some of the weaknesses that we're seeing now with modern networks,
Right.
not just those high performance networks where you need sub-second, transaction analysis because you're like a day trader or something like that. In a lot of networks today, you need to understand what's happening beyond what SNMP can give you in that 5-minute polling, or that 1-minute polling might not even be enough. So take a look on your screen here. You can see a visualization again from Nanog 73 from the presentation titled SNMP is Dead. It's a simplification, right? But it's a good visualization to see the reality of how streaming telemetry is going to differ from SNMP in terms of the information that it's going to provide you as an engineer of any type, cloud engineer, network engineer, looking at information from your network devices. So, for example, if you're polling every 5 minutes, you're going to get an average, a type of a roll up of traffic at those 5-minute intervals. It sort of smooths over some spikes and even troughs as well, by the way. We're going to get into that. So if you're looking at something like interface statistics or packet drops or low CPU utilization, memory utilization, things that you care about because they affect the network device, they affect passing traffic, and then therefore affect application performance, you're going to miss some information using SNMP. Even if you tune that way down to like 30-second polling, that's still not sufficient. That's very aggressive, by the way. It's still not sufficient for a lot of networks today. I mean, you can get away with that in some kind of low performance networks or a very small network where you don't have that much going on, especially if everything is going up and out and you're just kind of you have a handful of folks in your small office going out to email and things like that. But that's just not the reality today. So what we do with streaming telemetry is different. We're not polling the devices every 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 2 minutes. You are pushing events from the device, so it's unsolicited, to a subscriber, which would be a modern NMS that can ingest that kind of information. And so you can tune that down to 1 minute. You can tune that down to 30 seconds. You can tune that down to 1 second or even sub-second if you need it. And you can configure what events that you want to see, making your visibility much more granular, much more accurate. So here is another slide from Nanog 73 where you could see that you're going to get some inaccurate results even when you are, as opposed to spikes, you're going to see troughs. And here you're going to see a distinction where the event timestamp itself, right, is not going to be when the event occurred with SNMP. It's going to be the timestamp of when that SNMP trap entered the NMS. That's a problem, especially if you're polling or ingesting telemetry at very, very short intervals. Whereas streaming telemetry, the timestamp that you get is the timestamp of the event itself. And so what you're going to see here is this example on the screen is, spikes of traffic that didn't actually happen. So they're anomalies, and you're going to get inaccurate information. SNMP caches information and might send batches, right? And so that's going to appear like a spike in traffic, but it wasn't actually a spike in traffic. It was actually a result of SNMP sending a bunch of information in a form of a rollup. So again, it's just, but it is easy to set up. It is ubiquitous and common among all these network devices out there. So many network devices and non-network devices and servers and workstations and all these things that we still need to support it. But we do need to also plan on migrating away from SNMP to, again, more modern protocols. In this case, we're talking about streaming telemetry.
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up to the whole change in approach and the smoothness and the greater precision with all of the complications, let's call it, of that tapestry we talked about. The precision and the accuracy of what is and what is not has never really been more difficult when it comes to trying to understand the what is there, because of that interplay of those complications adding to the tapestry, along with all the different ins and outs and the way that traffic patterns themselves have and fundamentally changed. But the question remains the same as it has for 30 years: is it the network or the app? And so being able to address some of these things in more modern ways. And so one of the interesting things, folks, is that through this, and what's bringing people to this point to say, okay, maybe it's time to change what I'm thinking, is the barrier to entry, the requirements involved in this area for the enterprise has shifted. As Phil was mentioned, when it comes to the monitoring side, there's a lot of knowns there, a whole lot of knowns. We may not know what the values of those key value pairs are, but they're gettable. They're obtainable, and they sort of give you that snapshot of what can be known and the value of it. But when you want to explore, and this is where the observability has just really exploded over the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, really, but especially in the last 5 or so, where the instruments have gotten better and better and stronger on the analytics side, being able to instead of saying what was the health of X or what was the value of this key value pair, giant database kind of concept, but instead of saying what happened here, and being able to explore that more fluidly, more intuitively, to find what's currently not known but can be known through observability. And what happens when you put those things together, understanding the health and understanding the what could be, what possibly is, and being able to explore that in a hypothetical sense of really affirming or disconfirming with real evidence on the observability side. When you put those together, that's really the next generation of not product category, forget products for now, just the discipline of network monitoring really takes both sides, as that discipline has evolved and increasingly has become more versatile. I was reading an article yesterday about this. I don't want to spring this on you, but Network Engineer Survey, it was like a workplace thing. And over the last 5 years, the versatility of what their role is greater than it has been in the previous 5. It just keeps on growing up in terms of responsibilities and multiple hats, like you were mentioning, right? The network team ends up becoming the cloud team, but they can't leave behind the network responsibilities. But then there's also these others over here when it comes to what they have to do on the CI/CD side with their containers and doing all the work with the dev org. When it comes to where their responsibilities lie, it's become much more versatile. And that requires observability when it comes to being able to fluidly explore and fluidly tackle all these versatile situations that one finds himself. Yeah, just thought that was interesting. That as the job requirements have changed, so too, the instruments, what it means to do network monitoring really has evolved now to really include that observability part. And so that then leads people to say, well, I need to migrate, I need to move off, I need to change how I'm doing things. And so we wrote a guide. Okay. Because here's the thing, at Kintic, we have hundreds of customers. We all started off in that service provider space, killing it, doing all of that. Our history, our founders, kind of our reputation there. We've done well and increasingly progressing into more and more of these these areas and having to tackle some new things with enterprises. So last year, we rolled out our NMS. Okay, it's about 50 organizations that got it in our pilot program, tech preview kind of period. And during that time, this was the question that kept coming up. And what was interesting was how they were answering it. They were helping us see how they were planning to do this migration and adopt Kintic in this more modern approach of that observability and monitoring on both sides, that metrics as well as monitoring. And so this is kind of what many of them distilled down and said, kind of, here are the steps I would tell anybody else. So we codified that, put it in a guide, which you can all download, and then we're going to walk you through it here. So number one, find everything. Where is everything? Understanding all those different devices, where they're currently piped in, understanding the different protocols that are being assigned. Who cares about, this is the ultimate who moved my cheese. Who's going to care about that? And being able to get those stakeholders aligned and understanding how this network is going to change in terms of answering those questions that are versatile in their approach, right? So there's going to be some folks that rely on the network teams to get these kinds of answers and to troubleshoot these kinds of things, and making sure that those stakeholders are satisfied with their answers coming in a different form and format and from a different source may vary. So keeping everybody aligned, because the network, like Phil was saying, it is the lifeblood of the digital enterprise today. No network, no app, no revenue. We've kind of hand in hand walked into this world of the experience economy, to where now what we're selling are experiences, and those experiences have an existential dependency of network. No network, no experience, no revenue, no business. And so making sure we have those stakeholders aligned is very critical, because nothing can go wrong here when it comes to our monitoring tools and our management tools for the network that is the purpose of all of it anyway. We hope you choose Kintic as that modern option, and then winding down your old infrastructure. So we're going to take you through these bit by bit here. So I'm sorry, now this is something that is part and parcel of some of your history, being a network engineer and being highly capable, and with all the customers we talked through as well. There's a lot to gather, but go ahead, Phil. I've been yammering on here for a while, so why don't you chime in and talk to us about this inventory component?
Yeah, let's cover this first step, is gathering inventory. And again, it comes from just experience in working with NMSs in the past, and then migrating from one to another for a variety of reasons, but also from, you mentioned Kentic has a lot of, hundreds of customers. I will also say that we also are a predominantly engineering company. So internally, we have a tremendous number of former network engineers that, work for a vendor now. And so a lot of this was born from that as well. And just thinking through, what did I used to do? What worked, didn't work? Now, you probably already have some sort of device inventory already. You might already have an IPAM. Maybe you have carefully curated spreadsheets. And by the way, I say that like tongue in cheek, but if that's what you have, that's actually great, because I've worked with many organizations, customers, when I was with bars, and then, doing internal IT, where we didn't even have that. And we're operating from purely tribal knowledge, which is dangerous. You might be into ITIL and you have a configuration management system. I remember using ConnectWise for some years. Obviously, your current visibility tool is going to have information in it. So you really need to coordinate that. And, in my opinion, Josh, we're talking about migrating NMSs, but I also think that this is a really great opportunity to revisit some processes and workflows, and how are we doing documentation in an organization. Now, granted, that makes the project bigger, and maybe there's more stakeholders involved than just the network team and things like that, but I do think that it is a great opportunity to do that, to inventory some devices maybe that are missing asset tags, or make some decisions on what are we going to manage, what's important, and things like that. So before you start doing an inventory, though, what do you want to monitor? What do you want to inventory? And I really mean that. Like, do you need to keep track of unmanaged switches? I say that like rhetorically, and the answer is yes. You want to keep track of everything, but is it good enough to keep that in a spreadsheet, or do you need to be doing crazy amount of polling, or will this unmanaged switch support streaming telemetry? Well, probably not. So you have to make some decisions there. Or what are you doing with IP phones and IP cameras? Is it just up, down, or do you really need to look at CPU of an IP camera? Maybe you do, I don't know, but you can make all these decisions now. the likelihood is that your legacy NMS didn't even do some of those things. And if they did, maybe this is an opportunity to revisit just the strategy that you're doing to, or rather that you're employing to monitor those peripherals and ancillary devices. Network printers, there's another one, right? Then once you kind of have that list of what do we want to monitor, if it's largely the same, that's fine. Do we have access to everything? Can we get to everything that we want to monitor? The likelihood is that there are going to be some new things that you weren't able to monitor that you can now monitor. Maybe you're incorporating metrics from your Kubernetes environment, or from virtual routers and virtual routers, I should say, and firewalls in the cloud. Maybe there's some colo facilities where you weren't able to incorporate for whatever reason. Branch offices. Maybe you have, I've worked for some highly regulated organizations where we weren't able to monitor a very highly, like a firewalled section of the network that was highly secure for whatever reasons. And you look into that stuff. What are the subnets? What are the IP addresses and VLANs that you want to gather information from? A lot of that stuff is going to be in your current NMS, but again, an opportunity to revisit that, look at that. Perhaps it's just looking at routing tables and seeing what can we actually get to, ACLs, network diagrams. Network diagrams are pretty much out of date by the time they're written. And if you're still using Visio, I don't knock you for that, because it's a good tool. You have something, right? All too often there's nothing. But again, it's an opportunity to say, hey, let's update these network diagrams. I just went through these ACLs. We cleaned them up as this, in this exercise. We can say that these parts of these subnets aren't being routed anymore. They're whatever it happens to be. Ultimately, though, you don't want to rely on tribal knowledge. As you know, there is turnover. There's human error. You want to know what's in the routing table, what's in the fib and the rib. Another thing you want to do, and again, it might be in your tool like in ConnectWise or in your NMS or in spreadsheets, but you need to track down all your credentials so you can configure your new NMS, and you can use those credentials to integrate NMSs with your email and your alerting systems and things like that. So again, if it's not documented, this is the time to do it. What are your SNMP community strings and credentials? And, what are your utility accounts that you're using for your ticketing system, for ServiceNow and for ConnectWise and for your email system? There's probably some, generic utility accounts. Document them if they're not. Clean things up if they're not. If this is the first time you're using streaming telemetry, and that's the main impetus that you're migrating from a legacy NMS to a modern NMS, well, this is when you can start, documenting who and how are you publishing that information. What are your network devices that are streaming, or rather that are publishing streaming telemetry metrics, and you can have that device group set aside. Let's see. Distribution lists for email. You can get documentation about who should be getting alerts, who should be getting these emails, all that stuff, if you're using Zendesk and Jira and all that kind of stuff. And then, I don't know if this is quite the time to do it, but I like to get ahead of myself. It's probably a good thing to start thinking about, what do you actually want to alert on? So now, if you are going to start using streaming telemetry and you're getting information every second or every 2 seconds, awesome. Does that mean that if you see a little blip every in this 1 second thing and it goes to normal over time, you should send out a red alert and fire trucks? Maybe not. So it is good to start thinking about you're utilizing new technology. You're utilizing eBPF now to look at the network stack in a Linux machine. That's all a container really is, right? And then who's going to get alerted from that? Now we are looking at the democratization of information in a unified platform. You're not logging into, hopefully, going with whether it's Kentic or some other modern NMS. And again, we hope you go with Kentic. But the idea is that if you're logging into a unified system, you're not logging into one thing to see flow, and then some other tool to see SNMP, and some other tool to see information from your public cloud. You're looking at one tool, which means you probably have multiple teams logging in. So whether that's your network engineers, maybe network security folks, cloud engineers, maybe even application folks that are logging in, or business leaders. So whoever it happens to be, they should have. You should be thinking through that now, as especially as we get into the next bullet on stakeholders. So moving to the next slide, gathering device information can be manual. You could, You could start a lot of emails and conversations with other engineers and kind of pick people's brains and go through that process of discovery of tribal knowledge. That's going to be part of it. That's inevitable. It could involve reorganizing how you document your team's information and how you strategize around that. And of course, you could do this programmatically, SNMP walks and crawling the network that way. You can do it, from a very basic layer 3 standpoint, where you're just discovering, whether it's using ICMP or whatever under the hood, discovering active IPs, host names, MAC addresses, things like that. I mean, a modern NMS is going to be able to do that for you. There's going to be some kind of discovery function mechanism, whatever technology it's using under the hood. That once you give it the credentials and the subnets and the ability to access the network, routing is in place, it's going to go in there and discover the network for you. And ultimately, when you have that, to me, it's not quite yet a single source of truth. There's verification and getting those stakeholders involved to verify. But ultimately, you can use this as an opportunity to now start to consolidate into a single source of truth. Now, that's a religious debate. There are probably multiple sources of truth out there in reality, but you can start to have something you can trust. And now, once you have that network discovery complete and you can say, this is what I want to alert on, this is what I want to monitor, I mean, you start to get into the real work, which is focusing on layer 8. And for anyone that knows the OSI model, that would be people. So Josh, I'll hand this over to you now.
Oh, the humans.
Yes, the humans.
We have to deal with them. I saw something the other day and it was like a sad face emoji or something, and it said it's too people-y out here. Um, so I know it seems odd because I'm on a webinar, but I'm actually kind of an introvert. I'm much more comfortable in a library of books and that kind of thing than sometimes out here in these broadcast senses. But this I'm passionate about when it comes to things, because I believe that engineering and network teams have an unfair advantage, because of that dependency that we talked about earlier, to get customers, consumers, and constituents all on board. So customers, those that we are ultimately serving in a commercial fashion. They are purchasing something, customs, customer purchasing something. So these are ones that we have some sort of financial, contractual, commercial obligation or some kind of responsibility toward. And so that's that fashion of a stakeholder. It's a financial one. It's a stakeholder who cares a whole lot about the experience economy. They're the ones consuming that experience, paying for that experience, having that experience. And so that's principle number 1. What sort of understanding and alignment are going to be necessary for our customers to have the experience they're expecting? Second are consumers. Now, these are ones that are going to ingest and eat up, and we are informavores, right? We eat information as human beings. So who's going to be taking this in? Who's going to be taking in the information that's going to gain from this better, more modern view, versatile approach, exploratory navigation, and the ability to answer any question about my network? Who's going to take advantage of this, you mentioned like a network source of truth, or at least a corroborating point of evidence, right? At a bare minimum, what can be these sources of truth, this evidence that I can gather, and from any of those various perspectives? Because I need to consume the information as an informavore to then make proper decision about X. But whatever that X is, its dependency is the network. If we're running a digital business, that's our most existential dependency. So what are we consuming about all of this information so we can make proper decisions? And those consumers aren't always customers, as you mentioned. And then finally, people who give it, they give and care and are concerned about what happens with all of this, those constituent types. They may not necessarily be a consumer, they may not necessarily be a customer of it, but the people who care about the outcome. And so making sure that we map these 3 C's is a key component. And oftentimes we can struggle to know where and how these things match up. But ultimately, it comes down to a 4th C that's not on there, and that's the culture. And culture is really simple to map. Culture is a collection of beliefs, values, customs, and behaviors. And so we are what we repeatedly do. And so identifying what are the different cultural dynamics, what's my organization believe, what does it value, what does it repeatedly do in its behavior, understanding that cultural concern is sort of a prism to look through all of these other ones to understand how they're seeing that world too, because it's the prism that all of them have, the common culture that surrounds this organization. And so that would be just another one to consider, and understanding that all of these folks are looking through the prism of the culture as they perceive it in looking at your NMS project and migrating to the future. So thinking about those I guess 4 C's, the customers, the consumers, and the constituents, and all looking through the lens of the culture, the shared values, beliefs, and behaviors that we all do within that organization. And so Phil, with that, now
Mm.
I know that sometimes is this is the long part. This is the one that doesn't have a timeline on it. It's hard to project manage. But what I have found is that when you do account for these things and then set out to do it, you get a lot of cooperation. There's a lot of buy-in that you can get simply by the inclusion of these folks in your consideration of these kinds of projects. It can be the most time consuming, it can be the most difficult, but it's also the one that is the clincher, that
Mhm.
when we get these things aligned, things just go on rails at that point. And so the impact area of this is strong, even if it's a bit more soft skills.
I would say that the idea that you can get buy-in, I would change that to you must get buy-in.
Mm.
And the reason is that without that, how are you going to justify the resource cost of time, people, and money, licensing, things like that, to migrate from a system that is potentially embedded for years to a more modern system? Now, of course, you make the technical case, you make the use case, you show the benefits of saying we need to start, migrating to streaming telemetry. We need to start using these mechanisms to monitor our container environment and all these things. We need to start unifying our telemetry into one database because this is nuts how everybody's on a different page. But and you can make that case, but there's a time and effort cost to migrating, and we're going to get into that pretty heavy now. I'm going to go through some things about how to install and get going with your NMS. And I get it. It's not changing 1,000 WAN routers to an SD-WAN deployment, right? Which is a huge project that takes 3-4 years, whatever, or more, or never ends, right? And so you exist in this hybrid state for a long time. It's a single NMS, but it touches everything. So when you said earlier that, hey, network engineers have it easy, I was like, what? Huh? What are you talking about? Because
Unfair advantage.
yeah, an unfair advantage. That's what you said. Okay. My brain heard they have it easy, but I
No,
will
it's not
say,
easy. It's not
yeah,
easy.
no, no. I mean, think about it. You wiggle the wrong wire when you're like, just you're moving a box in one of the IDFs and you like brush up against an SFP or a wire, and all of a sudden, like the Chicago office is offline. Like the network is so impactful to application delivery and to performance that when you get down into constituents, people who care about the service or product, I mean, it's like everybody. Like everybody is going to care. I mean, you talk about application developers who care how their application's performing over the network. Hopefully, they're designing and building their applications to accommodate and to operate over a network. That's a struggle that engineers have. So I wanted to bring that up prior to getting into actually installing an NMS and launching a modern solution and onboarding as well. So let's dig into that. It means different things to different people, and of course, depending on the vendor. So whether it's Kentic or some other NMS, I can say though, there are some basic tasks that are common, having installed NMSs from different vendors in the past. So you're going to get the NMS up and running. Now, if it's an on-prem deployment, which I don't know necessarily why folks are doing that, other than in very highly regulated industries or highly secure environments where it's required. There are some fantastic SaaS deployment opportunities out there that eliminate the need to install boxes and to install a variety of agents. And so that's definitely the direction you should be going, is looking for a SaaS deployment option. You're going to configure access to that, whether it's some kind of role-based access control or SSO that you set up. You're going to get your NMS into DNS, things like that. And this is just to get this thing online, up and running. You're probably working with the professional services organization of your new NMS's company. And then from that point on, you're really going to start to organize it. How do you want to see your information? This is a great opportunity to reevaluate how you used to see information and how you can do it now. So, for example, prior to getting into alerts and all that stuff, how do you want to organize your information? Maybe it's into sites, your groups, right? Maybe it's into sites or regions or geolocations or offices or things like that. You're going to import your maps if you have campus maps and things like that, and you're not just overlaying on like Google Maps or something like that, which may be fine for just looking at sites across a geographic region. You might want to start considering, okay, what tags can I create so I can group devices or other entities together that aren't in the same geo or in the same specific site, that don't appear together, that in that kind of an easy way to organize information. So you can create tags that might be just custom for your organization for whatever you need. And we've talked about doing a discovery. As you went through that first step and discovered all those devices, now's the time to start moving all those devices into those appropriate groups. And so they start to show up where they need to show up on the map, start applying tags. So, going back to what we said on the last slide there's time and effort. But again, this is a fantastic opportunity to reorganize things and to reevaluate. So things work really well moving forward, and you break some of the bad habits that the team has already had. You eliminate some of the tribal knowledge and you bring to light and democratize that information. Throughout this process, though, I would recommend getting more eyes on the system, but I say that with the caveat that not too many eyes. You don't want too many cooks in the kitchen. I've made that mistake where I was inviting too many people because I was sort of proud of myself in a project, and I wanted to get so and so involved, and so that was a bad idea. Get the necessary people involved, but don't go it on your own. You need to get somebody, all those stakeholders that are key people. So somebody from the NOC, if the help desk is logging into this thing, get somebody from the help desk. How do they want to see their heads up display? Do they want to see maps? Do they want to see, what geo do they care about? Those are the things that you need to know now. And you get those sanity checks as you're building out, excuse me, and onboarding the new NMS. Um, your typically you can configure your network devices to point to multiple NMSs. So at this point, for example, SNMP, you can point, SNMP can point to multiple servers, right? So you could start doing that with many of your network devices. Obviously, you do need to be careful because if you're polling frequently from multiple NMSs, it could adversely affect the performance of those boxes. So keep that in mind. But as part of the process, what you're doing here, the spirit of what I'm trying to say is that you are running two NMSs in parallel now, and you're slowly migrating devices from one to another, but you're not migrating. They're going to be pointing to both. And the reason that you do that is so you can mitigate risk in any kind of cutover. Now, in like a network core cutover or a firewall cutover or a WAN cutover, so in like pure networking sense, I would never, unless I absolutely had to, just do like a hot cut with no, no ability to run things in parallel, so I can move subnets over from one core to another or move ACLs from one core to another and test. It also allows you to minimize your blast radius because you can roll back in pieces. If you find that, my goodness, I'm hosing my core by pointing to new network devices, you know that now before you've cut things over and made changes that are difficult to roll back. And then at this point, I would integrate your new NMS with your email system, your ticketing system. Now, I'm not saying that you're turning off everything in your old system. That's still up and running, and that's probably what your NOC is still using, or your SOC even. But you are integrating this new tool, this new platform with those systems as well. Now, I mentioned thinking about alerts earlier, but this is really the time when you start to dig into it more because you see the devices on your screen. You're starting to poll devices, or you're starting to receive subscriber information from your streaming telemetry publishers. So you can start to see actual data in the system. Awesome. This is where the rubber meets the road. That's why we have the system. So you can start to evaluate your alerts. What do we want to alert on? What are my thresholds? What are my baselines and benchmarks? We've all heard of alert fatigue. It's a real thing. When it occurs, people ignore alerts, and those emails go into the spam folder or into some folder, so I don't care about them. This is a time to evaluate that and evaluate it carefully because that is the whole point. that the system is doing those things programmatically and alerting you to an issue. And a modern NMS is going to alert you to an issue. It's going to be very difficult for a human being to just track down. You know, there's latency. You know, we're getting a lot of TCP retransmits between two container pods. I mean, really, you're going to just go kind of like dig through logs to see that. So having the system alert you of that based on your specific company's needs, maybe you have specific latency thresholds that you need to configure. That this is the time to do it.
Mhm.
So uh, you're running two NMSs in parallel. You're considering device utilization. You're considering all your dashboards. And now you can start considering like visualizations. What makes sense to your team? Whether that's like having Sankey diagrams, or you just want to see up, down, or you want to see a red for critical health. And that red is my latency spiked to over 100 milliseconds on this particular link. You can get that granular, and you should go through the process of considering that. I know working with well, this has happened many times, but one that comes to mind is a healthcare provider in the Midwest that had, I think, a series of 18 hospitals and then hundreds and hundreds of doctors' offices and 6 data centers. And their imaging software application, it was hosted out of their own data centers, not out of public cloud, but private cloud. And there were very strict latency. It was for MRIs, by the way. It had strict latency requirements. Otherwise, the transfer of the MRI image would fail. We're talking about like literal like healthcare and like hospitals. So it wasn't like some mundane like, oh, Facebook is taking too long to load. No, we're talking about operating rooms. Maybe not necessarily operating rooms, but we're talking about people's lives and health. So we hard coded in the SD-WAN and in the NMS for alerting what the maximum threshold, which it was 35 milliseconds, which is crazy low, but that was the maximum threshold before the images would start to fail and there were problems. And so, yes, you can avoid alert fatigue, but you do need to accommodate the reality of the applications that you're running, and that includes applications that live in the public cloud. It includes SaaS applications that you don't own and barely manage, but you do consume, and again, could be mundane or mission critical. So once you have all that set up and you are seeing what you want to see, and you've thought through some of your alerts and all that kind of stuff, you can start to think about how much can I rely on the system. Now, a modern NMS, I know this from experience from other NMSs, but especially with how Kentic approaches it. A modern NMS is going to do a lot of this for you. We're looking at baselining, right? This is what normal looks like. We're looking at benchmarking is different. That's not necessarily what normal looks like, but that's what normal looks like on a Monday at 8 o'clock, because that's when everybody's logging in, so we see a spike. And the system is able to say, no, we don't need to alert. I get it, that's beyond the threshold that you don't like, but it is normal. And so the system can generate some of these things dynamically. Maybe DNS resolution time needs to be a certain amount before an application fails, right? So you can set those you can allow the system to set those dynamically. Another example is there are certain network devices that run hot, not temperature hot. Maybe they do run temperature hot. I don't know, but they run hot in the sense that they're, when they're fully loaded with a bunch of SFPs and 10, 40, 100 gig links, their CPU is going to run 60, 80%. And that's okay. It's not like a car where if you're constantly redlining, it explodes and you're shooting pistons out of the hood. They're going to run a little hot. And so maybe that's normal. And so maybe that's where the system over time sees that 80% is okay. But if it spikes to 87%, I want to know. So you have to start to get familiar with the system to the extent that you trust some of those baselines and dynamically created benchmarks and trend analysis. So after, where are we here? We're on the wrong slide. We're going to wind down our infrastructure, right? There we go. So after your alerts are kind of refined, you feel that they're correct, your integrations are working, the data that you want to see is in your dashboards, the stakeholders, so the folks that run your NOC and your SOC and your network security team, and maybe folks that are looking at billing. You might have alerts on, my cloud AWS bills are creeping up, and you have alerts on that, whatever it happens to be, whatever metrics that you're monitoring. The folks that care about those, if everybody's satisfied, all your devices are accounted for, it is time to start decomming your old NMS. but it's very important to validate everything. Go through that testing period. This is true if you're a network engineer of any type, you know that you don't just turn off the old core switch. You let it sit there running with nothing plugged into it except the power, never change the configuration. You just leave it alone if you do need to do a huge rollback like that, which is highly unlikely if you've gone through this very methodical approach here. So going through all that validation, you want to get sign off from the appropriate stakeholders. So again, as opposed to just turn what is the old methodology? Let's just turn it off and see who submits a ticket. We don't do that. We don't really want to do that. I get it. It's funny. It's it's like part of the ethos of being a network engineer. We don't actually want to do that, right? So what you do is you migrate everything over. Everything is pointing to your new NMS, and you're going to create backups of your old NMS if possible. We're not deleting VMs. If it exists as a virtual machine, you're letting it run. You're not recycling hardware. Do not unplug the power. Just let it continue to run. Just have nothing pointing to it. Your reporting should be set up, or you're setting it up now. So what kind of reports are you producing? Do you need to be able to export things as a JSON? Do you need reports to go to some business leader? What kind of reports, and where do they go? Those need to be automatic and not manually generated. So it is an important step to nail down now. Now, at this point, since everything is pointing over to both systems, right, and you're only using the new NMS, you can start to go back and remove the integration from rather all the pointers from your network devices to your old NMS. So at this point, that's when you're going to start to remove the configuration for SNMP community strings and the IP address of where it's pointing to. If you happen to have been using or experimenting with streaming telemetry, though the publisher is no longer the old NMS, things like that. Personally, I would eliminate access to the old NMS entirely, except for a few key people. You don't need people logging into it and messing around because it is there to roll back if necessary. So you want to leave it up and running, but decrease the access. And I would also leave it in DNS for a time as well, so you do have access if you need to get into it. It doesn't take long for a NOC to get familiar with a new NMS, in my opinion, especially if there's if it's like a part of the regular workflow of managing the network and it's on the heads up display. It's going to be a very quick process. So your help desk, your security teams, whoever, they're going to see quickly what's missing, how we can optimize this, how we can improve a dashboard. That's going to happen quickly because it is part of the actual daily operations. But I would not turn off the old system for another reason, which is, I mean, you probably don't have much in the way of data yet, right? Maybe it's a month worth of data. So if you need something from 6 months ago, if your old NMS has it's in there. So you don't want to delete that system. You don't want to completely recycle it and throw it in the dumpster just yet. So hold on to it for a time until you meet all the requirements of data storage and retention and all that kind of stuff. And then you can move forward with shutting everything down and saying goodbye.
That was a whirlwind. So, folks, it was just 4 steps. It's really simple. Well, you have an unfair advantage again if it's the SaaS deployment, as we were talking about backstage. It's all virtual, folks. There is no stage. But before we got on today, we were talking about some of these things, and that is one of the virtues of Kintick. And by way of just wrapping up here, just a little bit about us. So today we talked about the network monitoring, network management, NMS, stuff there on the far left corner that you see. But there's a lot more to Kintick than just NMS. As Phil was mentioning earlier, we are called the Network Observability Company because that's really our game when it comes to understanding the whole system and its outputs, and then from that, identifying what's going on here and being that source of truth, being that place where you can answer any question, that workbench for network engineering to know and do. And so it really covers the whole waterfront, from the network monitoring to the DEM, the digital experience, some synthetic testing and so forth, to that compositional things of the clouds, containers, apps, and all the different variants therein. When it comes to how we understand our position in the rest of the internet, every organization has levitated and now lives in this ethereal space that is sort of floating around with a whole bunch of other galaxies in the internet. And so how do I relate to the whole when the whole is everything? and everything colliding and flying around at once. And then finally, keeping yourself safe in all of that, from DDoS attack, from understanding through all of that intelligence, through all of that signal, what's in here that is forensic in nature. Where can I identify the problem spots? Where can I call out that I am in fact compliant? Where can I identify where I could be exposed given the signals I'm getting? And am I currently under attack right now? And being able to do that also with, AI,
Mm-hmm.
being able to do so in such a way that in all that versatility, like we were asking, we're all being asked to do a whole lot more than we didn't used to do. But we've been talking a lot for most of us for a few decades. So what if I could just ask the system what I know in my head, but I don't know how to build a query for that in this new domain of cloud that I'm stepping into, or my Kubernetes and container management. These could be new domains, but I know how to ask a question. And so what if I could just natural language query into Kintic and then the proper answer comes back? Being able to take advantage of all of those opportunistic chances to be a versatilist, to be the one that answers everything for the most existential component of the whole digital enterprise, the network. No network, no experience, no experience, no revenue, no revenue, no business. And so being able to be that linchpin and being able to do so quickly and versatilely, because I can just ask any question, and doing so with AI across really helps. And so there's three things I want to leave you with, regarding all of that. One is that this is sort of how we constructed all of that to be both sides of what's really necessary to get this job done in this new tapestry and composition of networks being strange, compared to how they once were. And it's in our DNA. When you look across all of those different areas that I was mentioning, they are the concerns of anyone who cares about the network. And so it's going to be all the networks. Synthesized context, yeah, meaning. What does it all mean? How can I explore and find new meaning that may be hidden by combining things myself through guidance and open exploration? Being able to have a companion along with me who's learning from me, an AI who can relativize things for me and my organization to where it makes sense in my context. And then being able to do that by understanding how I relate to everything else and what's coming in and flowing with me in a completely interconnected world. We're all floating around in an internet now. And so from this, it was sort of inevitable that these things would come about, that we'd be able to consolidate and to consolidate both the tools as well as correlate the telemetry. And I'm still in your thought. I know that you're passionate about this one, Phil. Why don't you speak to this real quick and
Sure.
we'll wrap.
Yeah, well, for the sake of time, I'll keep it very brief. But the idea here is that, my experience is that many engineers and and myself included, would have to utilize multiple tools to get the information that we need, multiple dashboards and graphs, and all that stuff is important. But one of the things that we really value at Kentic is the ability to augment an engineer so they can actually, solve a problem both in real time and then have understanding, find meaning in the data historically, and that means having all of that in a unified database. And so we really do approach network telemetry as a whole, whether it's metrics from devices or flow and cloud and synthetics and all those kind of things, as a data analysis problem. So we need all that information in one spot, and the benefit of that is that we can then find how those data points relate to each other. When I have CPU utilization spiking in a router, I can see the direct impact to application traffic, to flow, to page load times, and to DNS resolution times, and you see how those things work together.
Yeah, that leads me to like kind of the main dash, being able to from this aerial view, then probe deep into any particular area because it's all connected. All those different streams and confluences of data are put together into a single understanding. And so from that high level, explore where you will. And what you'll often find is that it wasn't the network when the app was slow. Um, and then finally being able to do this in a very customized, specific way as organizations continue to mature, continue to evolve into their own way that their network is monetized, is commercialized, and is used to support their organization. Being able to understand how my organization works, doing that in a custom way, being able to track it with the appropriate baselines, as Phil was mentioning earlier. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, Phil, but just racing toward the end there because I have to get to the most important one, which is to say thank you to everybody who's here. And Phil, final word for everybody that joined us today.
Yeah, please go and download the Kentic NMS migration guide. Put a lot of time and effort into it. You see the URL on your screen, kentic.com/NMS guide. Super helpful if you're actually trying to migrate NMSs. And that's what we're all about, is really helping a network engineer in the trenches keep the lights on.
Yeah, you matter and you matter to us. We want to keep things going, keep your networks great. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you out there.
Bye bye.